Right, so are Israel themselves in need of another ceasefire now? Why would they, as the occupying and aggressor state, want such a thing? Well, it would appear negotiations, once again being brokered by Qatar, are underway after Netanyahu a week ago dismissed any notion of such things. Why would he change tack and allow negotiations to go ahead now then? He's massively right-wing. He's proudly boasted that he has blocked any notion of a two-state solution for decades. He leads the most right-wing coalition government Israel has ever seen. But there are three good reasons for Israel to do this, and all of them have to do with ensuring Netanyahu, of course, stays in power. It's got to be all about him. But equally, for as much as he needs another ceasefire to remain in post, he also needs to resume attacks afterwards for exactly the same reason. Right, so Israel now need a ceasefire. Why is this then, Damo? They are the aggressing state. They're the occupiers. If they want this to end, why don't they just end it? You might be thinking that. It's a logical line of thought to take. But as with everything Benjamin Netanyahu does, if it isn't serving his own self-interest, if it isn't about keeping him in power now and going forwards, then a shift is required. And there are three solid reasons for why he needs a ceasefire again very soon. And also for why it won't last probably any longer than the last one did. And Israel will be, in all likelihood, breaking it all along the way, just as they did last time. The first reason, though, is just very good old-fashioned political pressure. Polling right now, conducted a few days ago by Israel's Channel 12, found that 70% of Israeli citizens are in favour of a ceasefire and exchange deal. 27% of Israelis are in favour of an exchange deal and a humanitarian truce, and just 3% of Israelis are still in favour of continuing the war. Of course, they refer to it as a war. It isn't that when one side is so ridiculously mismatched. It is an extermination. It is a genocide. And the civilian casualties, more than 1% of the Gaza population right now, have been wiped out. You can expect the numbers demanding a ceasefire to rise, though, as the economic fallout for Israel increases, thanks to the actions being taken in no small part by the Houthis in Yemen, causing absolute chaos for Israel's shipping, sea trade being something they are utterly reliant on for their national prosperity. Shipping companies are refusing to go there. Freight is now having to travel all the way around Africa to reach them, increasing costs. Trips that used to take 19 days before this war now will take a full month instead. The effectiveness of one country by virtue of its geography imposing what amounts to incredibly powerful sanctions can't be dismissed. Yemen have played a blinder in solidarity with Palestine. The knock-on effects of this, though, are investment in Israel disappearing as well, in part due to this economic hit, but also due to the poor press in other parts of the world as investors and corporations get named and shamed for choosing to do business there. Netanyahu can't afford for that to go on. He can't really afford for the Houthis to come out of this looking like they've achieved something with their actions either. But that cat, I think, is firmly out of the bag. He can hope the US-led coalition against their actions, Operation Guardians of Prosperity, win the day. But with the US using $2 million missiles to shoot down Yemeni drones costing a few thousand, the bank of Biden is likely to dry up if they can't win quickly. And, well, the US don't have a great track record fighting Yemen, and you only have to look at all the shipping companies remaining clear of the area despite news of this operation to see just how much faith they have in this action making any difference. The second reason Israel need another ceasefire soon is mostly to do with the US. You see, Israel will buy weapons from the US and the UK and other countries, and they use them very quickly, to the most extreme degree of armed assault going. Carpet bombing Gaza from north to south, making a mockery of their claims to be targeting Hamas, when they are simply levelling Gaza and anyone and anything in their path, taking out whoever in the process, hoping they take out a few of those Hamas operatives in amongst all the civilians who they care nothing for, seen as inferior as they do anyway. And as for those 130 hostages still held by Hamas, well, I'll come on to them in a little bit. This all leads into the relationship between the US, the main supplier of arms to Israel, and the Israeli state itself, because the indiscriminate bombing is giving genocide Joe Biden a headache. Biden's own polling is tanking, to the extent the numbers say there's every chance he could actually lose to Donald Trump come the next presidential election, should Trump be selected, and that's in the air at the moment. And the main reason for that is the US actually blocking a ceasefire and its unequivocal support for Israel. Israel is a handy landing pad for the US, though the UK giving the US permission to use a base in Cyprus right now for reasons we cannot confirm, national security and all that, but that they aren't transporting arms into Israel, I'll eat my shoe. Biden historically said if we didn't have an Israel, we'd have to create one, just to suit Western aims amid Arab lands. The US is losing respect and credibility over its unopposed support for Israel. The way Israel is acting, and globally this is making the US look cowardly and weak and indifferent to the death and suffering that we're seeing in Gaza. Biden's called for restraint in a bid to limit the damage to himself, pretty much. But Israel doesn't seem to have got that message. And now Biden could slap conditions on the military support he's sending. That's a nice idea, actually, but he hasn't done that yet. And I don't think that is so much a question of competence. It could be. But the US is making a fortune on arms sales right now to Israel, so his money speaking louder than humanitarianism here. My reason for thinking that way is because he chose to bypass Congress to deliver more military aid. That's not the act of somebody preaching restraint and meaning it. But nonetheless, the more this impacts Biden's chances of a second term, it's only a matter of time before he puts himself first and cuts Netanyahu off. So, Benjamin Netanyahu, he needs to cool this situation down to secure more arms because he's burning through them too fast. And thirdly, there's the appallingly bad press, of course, that the IDF has inflicted on Israel with the killing of 3 Israeli hostages who came out shirtless, waving a white flag, and were killed anyway. The white flag is an internationally known symbol of surrender. They came out shirtless so as to prove Hamas hadn't strapped bombs or other devices to them. And still the IDF just assumed they were Palestinians, and that's why they killed them. And that brings into sharp focus the fact that civilians are clearly being deliberately targeted. Because these men were unarmed. They knew that. They can't even use skin colour as an excuse for accidentally shooting them, because one of them was white. It told the world that every claim by Israel that they are being surgical in their strikes, that they are only targeting Hamas targets, was a great fat lie. This shooting was heard around the world, and there was a distinctive shift against Israel following that event. Like everything Israel told the world about what they are doing in Gaza, it proved once again that they were lying about it. So Netanyahu has 3 reasons there to want a ceasefire. How do we know he's actively pursuing one then? Well, back on the 14th of December, 2 weeks after the genocide resumed, Netanyahu was saying absolutely not to renewing negotiations in Qatar with Hamas, who were quite happily sat there waiting to resume talks at the table. But then those 3 Israeli hostages got shot by the Israeli Defense Force. So that come the 16th of December, Netanyahu U-turned and sent his head of Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service, to Qatar to begin negotiations with Hamas again. Now that's 5 days ago. We can only assume they are still at it at this point in time. We've heard nothing more on that yet. Whether Netanyahu thinks looking like he'll negotiate another ceasefire will be enough and not actually following through with a ceasefire as he did before, we will have to see. But pressure is clearly on for him to have done an about-face so quickly. Equally, there's pressure on him to end it again if it does come to pass, as he can't hold his coalition government together otherwise. And that is entirely his own fault for going into government with the sort of people he did, the country's far right. During the last ceasefire, for example, his security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who during the last ceasefire threatened to resign if the war was not reignited, and complained he was excluded from the decision-making process on that ceasefire. He was since asked whether he thought Netanyahu should resign by Israel National News, and he said, "I'm sure that after the war, everyone will be held accountable. Netanyahu will give clear answers. Right now, I'm calling to conquer the Gaza Strip." So there you have it. Nothing less than full conquest of Gaza will do for him, and Netanyahu is reliant on him to stay in power, being a coalition partner. Just one of them, and others are equally as hard right and batshit. Functionally, there can be no peace, as I see it, whilst Netanyahu remains in power. Ceasefires can only ever be temporary. He may not be able to pull another off and keep his government together at all. If he goes to the polls, then he will end up being dumped out of power completely, and he can't stand the thought of that. But there are legitimate reasons why it is in Israel's interest to have ceasefires periodically, and the likes of Ben-Gvir, if they have 1 ounce of sanity in their bodies, ought to be able to see that. Though that's questionable. Whether they do or not, we'll see. But whilst Netanyahu leads, this won't end. It's no longer about retaliation for a Hamas attack on October 7th. But his government, it would appear, hinges on keeping this going now it has started, and probably is one very good reason why Israel went ape when the UN demanded a ceasefire of them just prior to the shooting of those Israeli hostages, as you can learn all about in this video here. And I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.